Declaration stage then. This is this is the next formal step from the process at the horse racing end of things. You know, what happens at that point?
Yeah, this is the first time the bookmakers actually look at their over round. So their over round is their total percentage, which adds up all the horses. So where the first time where they actually get to price those competitively. And it's also though the stage again, like where it's still you're still betting against. There's only probably maybe one or two people who might revise those markets. So particularly some of the handicaps, you will get sort of interesting revisions. They might find that some of the anti-post prices they had were either too short or too big. So it's definitely a good window to come in. Like say, for example, Sunday morning before Tuesday's declarations, having a look at a race like the Fred Winter, you might see some quite different price movements. And it is a good window to come in. But I'd still say it's not the best window, because I'll come to that in a minute.
And how much is this sort of automated essentially? And how much is it traders at this point?
Yeah, so like it depends on the operation. Like obviously my experience is more from the corporate bookmaker side of things. Some of them will have automated things that help price races, but I think for the big races like Cheltenham, they will use more human engagement in terms of pricing those races, because they'll have traded them throughout the anti-post period. They'll know what customers have had bets on various selections, etc. So it'll be more human. But therefore, from a punter's perspective, you're betting against one or two humans. So in that regard, you're not betting about like when you get closer to the off, the collective brains of everybody and all the big syndicates into the exchange, etc., which essentially starts setting the prices. It still is a good window, because you're just betting against a couple of other people's opinions rather than the collective masses of everyone.
So the exchanges doesn't even have that much of an impact at this point?
Not really. It begins to form. The exchange will sort of, even if you look at day-to-day racing, the exchange will form off what some of the first draft of prices that go up the day before, and the exchange starts to form from that. And largely the really big exchange liquidity and the big exchange syndicates don't tend to play until quite late. So for something like Cheltenham, they'll come in a bit earlier, obviously, because there's more customer and recreational demand for Cheltenham. So obviously it makes sense for them to do that. But they really end up setting the prices as it gets closer to the off. And essentially what happens is that the bookmakers will end up following the exchanges for the most part in that world.
So let's move to the day of the race and until the off. And this is where I feel like the landscape has changed massively in recent years, with the sort of ever more sophisticated AI machine learning, betting syndicates having a massive influence. And this is an area I really don't understand. So talk me through the day of the race until the off.
Yeah, so I'll talk through obviously how it works with some of the bookmakers first, and then obviously the impact of the exchanges, because I think the impact of the exchanges is what you're referencing there. But what generally happens, and probably the best window for people to bet in, is in the morning time on day of race, mainly because, and this concession is often sort of laughed about and people sometimes think they're above it, but best odds guaranteed is still one of the most generous concessions that's out there in the market.
Definitely.
Because it just simply gives that security net of, if your horse drifts, you're getting the best of both. And it costs bookmakers a lot of money. And it's similar with the pools. SP guarantee costs the pool operators a lot of money as well. So when things cost money, that's when punters should be alerting themselves to place their bets. So that morning period, not alone do you have that level of where the market hasn't fully formed yet, there's still some uncertainty, so you can still get some incorrect prices. You often also have the benefit of extra places. So for example, races like I'd imagine the Supreme will probably have extra places in a few areas. But obviously races like the Fred Winter, the Ultimate, will probably be 5, 6, maybe even 7 places in places, plus best odds guaranteed. And then some of them will also be throwing in money back offers. And when the prices are less certain, that's the best time really to bet, to maximize your returns as a punter. And that's the times where bookmakers probably struggle the most, that early period as best odds guaranteed gets turned on. But to your point around
before we move on to that point, sorry. So can punters still expect, given we've got the more difficult taxation landscape from the bookmaker's perspective, what scale of those kind of concessions that you've just mentioned can punters expect next week?
Yeah, no, that's a great question, because I think if you look back to sort of 10 years ago, that was probably when it was at its highest, where you had best odds guaranteed. I think there was an example, one of the Supreme Novices Hurdles, the one Champagne Fever one, where one of the bookmakers went 7 places and you had best odds guaranteed and there was free bets and signups. That was probably the peak. But as look, racing's become a very expensive sport for bookmakers to run. You mentioned the tax changes that are upcoming as well. That's absolutely part of how bookmakers now see the sport. So because of that, and you do see this when you look across the betting operators, some now don't give you best odds guaranteed if there's extra places. So you might only get the best odds guaranteed on the grade ones where there's no extra places, whereas on the handicaps you might not. I think if you shop around, you might find those who still do. So I suggest obviously for those to shop around, the best odds guaranteed is worth it. But you are right, like it has changed. I don't think we'll ever see the levels of generosity we saw sort of 10 years ago, but I'd still expect there to be, like, it still is a massive opportunity for bookmakers to bring customers in, and obviously it is the big festival for the year. So there, I still think there will be some decent offers and decent generosity. The extra places are obviously a good advantage. And as I said, take advantage of any of the offers and concessions that are going your way. It's kind of harder to beat. It's harder to beat them without them.
And that just before we move on to the exchanges, that point sort of you mentioned that how something like the Cheltenham Festival is like a beacon for future fans, isn't it? So the in terms of how important it is to bookmakers, but also to the sport, the pull of this a meeting of this scale is just overwhelming, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. From a horse racing perspective, obviously bookmakers like with a lot of the bookmakers now have operations in the US, and things like the Super Bowl have probably taken over. But you're absolutely right. From a horse racing perspective, Cheltenham still is the biggest ticket. Especially even in terms of how it sort of resonates for the whole year. Like the Grand National as a race would be a bigger betting race, but tends to be the Grand National tends to be once a year punters. They tend not to come back. Whereas the Cheltenham punters, obviously there's 28 races. It is a really, really key time for bookmakers to like acquire customers and bring customers into racing. So yeah, it's vital for the sport. Yeah.
Right. So exchanges.
Yeah, so the exchanges are obviously fascinating, and the exchanges, like for a long number of years, have really been sort of leading the bookmakers rather than the other way around. And the exchanges essentially, well, obviously they're a collection of all the betting intelligence that exists between all the various different people betting into it. But obviously, the large chunk of it is these big betting syndicates who have really, really built sophisticated sort of machine learning models which factor in all the potential variables you can factor into a race. But they're also looking at things like money flow, what the bookmakers are doing. They're sitting and analyzing the prices. They're not providing like a service to a customer where they have to offer their prices the day before. They're coming in to make money. And therefore their focus and their sharpness on how accurate their prices are just outstanding. And they are all the knowledge that comes into it, whether it's horses that are fancied or not, you'll see it every day of the week. They tend to be pretty accurate. Now, the beauty is, though, with this is that over a long period of time, the syndicates will be accurate. But in Cheltenham, because of the variance, there is only 28 races. So it's not to say you can't beat them or be right. So I wouldn't be afraid of a horse drifting on the exchanges. It's not to the extent that you'd be afraid of a horse drifting in a maiden hurdle in Clonmel on a Thursday. There's obviously different factors that go into it. It'll essentially just be the view of the syndicates and how they interpret that horse. But it doesn't mean to say that the horse is. It's just I just treat it slightly differently than the way you would if you saw a big drifter on a Monday to Friday meeting.
And how important in that whole edition is public money then in that scenario?
Yeah, like it's very like the exchanges will be mindful of it because they know that there's more recreational that comes into the mix. So the big syndicates will know that the recreational mix is higher than it would be on a quiet Tuesday and Subtle. So they will factor that in. But they'll also know that there will be moves on certain horses that are driven by recreational interest rather than actually what the true probability should be. And ultimately, the true probability of the horse will always outweigh it. So yes, the exchange, the big syndicates be mindful of it, but ultimately, the recreational and the public money doesn't move the prices at all. It's really the big syndicates that determine what the price is, not the public money.
Okay. And so on the day to the off, the windows where bookmakers from I always struggle to use the word generous with bookmakers, but for when should your ordinary everyday punter strike? When are the key moments on the day?
Yeah, I'd say on the day, I'd say as early as possible, just simply down to the fact that the prices are likely to be less accurate. As in, when you think about all the stuff we mentioned about the syndicates and stuff, all the knowledge that's come from the betting markets hasn't gone into those models just yet. So there's likely that there's more volatility. And if you're getting the concession of things like best odds guaranteed and your extra places, you're giving yourself a pretty good safety blanket. And that would be the time, I think, where people should. It's also where the bookmakers struggle the most in terms of how they make money. So if that's where the bookmakers struggle, then the punters should be on top of it.
Absolutely.
Watch live racing now on racingtv.com.